Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our reading through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are in the great poem Salut, Monde, passage number 2. Now, the assumption is that you've been working with us at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side to find our playlist, and that you have been with us from the very beginning, at least that's the hope, from the introductory lectures through the inscription study, all the way up to passage number 1 of Salut, Monde. And so now we're ready to turn to the second passage. Now, the only background information for this passage is to remind you of what we've said a number of times already. Whitman was very impressed by what he called new science, or the modern science. The idea that there was all kinds of new research that was beginning to happen regarding biology, regarding geology, regarding any number of other areas of science, from physics and on in chemistry, and on it goes. So we're going to see that right away as we get into this conversation. By the way, notice his use of the word within. 4 times it will be used. The idea that there's something embedded within the world of nature that will lead one to become so, his word here, and one of his favorite words in all of Leaves of Grass is curious, right? I hope, if reading Leaves of Grass does anything for us, and I hope it does a number of things for us, one of those things is I hope that it awakens a certain kind of curiosity, a certain kind of, what was the word that we used from passage 1? Wonder, right? Wonder. Let's just enjoy the passage. Within me, latitude widens, longitude lengthens, Asia, Africa, Europe are to the east, America is provided for in the west. Banding the bulge of the earth winds the hot equator. Curiously north and south turn the axis ends. Within me is the longest day. The sun wheels in slanting rings. It does not set for months. Stretched in due time within me, the midnight sun just rises above the horizon and sinks again. Within me, zones, seas, cataracts, forests, volcanoes, groups, Malaysia, Polynesia, and the great West Indian Islands. Now, as we've already said, you can begin your list now of all the different kinds of places on the globe, or on the map, that Whitman will be referencing, and certainly we're going to pick up 3 of them right away here. Notice it's a remarkable line. This within me takes us back to the opening lines of passage 1, "Oh, take my hand, Walt Whitman." Now, again, it's always a challenge to know exactly what it is, who is the antecedent to the pronoun me here. Me who? Well, I think it's the poetic vision, and I really believe that this is what Whitman is aiming at, to try to encapsulate and somehow capture all of the different facets of this amazing world that we live in, of course, that he lived in as well. Within me, notice, latitude widens, longitude lengthens. Quite literally, we're building off of this idea of dynamic growth. In other words, he says, I want to deal with the very microcosmic and as well the expansive, as we said in our beginning of our study. Whitman is the great poet of both the very, very small and the most magnificent, the large. He called it myriads in passage 1, didn't he? And then we'll begin to, of course, start the naming process. And again, I recommend that you just make a list of all of the different places and types and people types that he creates. I have students that love to create this game of this poem where they just start listing all this, and they begin by asking, okay, do I know what he's talking about, or do I need a Google or Google image to know what he's talking about? And it's fun to be able to play that game. Notice, we've got Asia, we've got Africa, we've got Europe. He says they are all to the east. Of course, they're to the east in relationship to what? Notice the dash makes us think of Emily Dickinson. Obviously, to the east of America, right? That is to say, they're all to the east. But what's fascinating is that Asia and Africa are actually, well, I mean, you could make the debate as you're looking at a globe, which direction you're going to go to get to east or west to get to those places, right? You would argue that from America, Asia would probably be what we would constitute as west, but certainly Africa and Europe would be to the east. Notice here, America is provided for in the west as a very loaded line, right? I mean, west, yeah, well, of course, here already, manifest destiny, as we've said in earlier lectures, and the conquering in many ways of the land of the West is happening during Whitman's lifetime, and he was fascinated, no question, by it. Then he has this very interesting verb, banding, only used one time in all of Leaves of Grass. Here it is. The bulge of the earth, by the way, notice that sound, that resonance of those two B sounds, winds the hot equator, and as we've said, I mean, this is kind of part of that new science, to talk about what it is that you're looking at when you look at a globe. And then one of his favorite words in all of Leaves of Grass, used over 50 times, depending upon how you count it, the word curious or curiously. North and south is obviously fascinating, because Whitman is the great poet, as we're going to see when we get to drum taps, of the North and the South, right? Here, obviously, he's just talking more in relationship to the globe. Curiously, North and South turn the axis ends. That idea that the world spins, the globe spins on its axis, is something that for Whitman just kind of blows him away. Within me, we'll get the next rendering of it, the longest day, the sun wheels. Notice his verbs, widens, wheels, in slanting rings, this idea of the ring, everything is cyclical. We almost think of our Taoism and the yin-yang symbol, very influenced obviously by the poetry of Blake, as we've said in other lectures. Blake very influenced by Taoist ideas, as represented of course with that famous yin-yang symbol, the idea that everything is cyclical. It does not set for months, which is interesting for us to say that the sun doesn't set for months. In other words, the idea of longer days and the like, right? Stretched in due time, the next within me, the midnight sun. Notice the paradoxes. As a poet, he loves these paradoxes, right? Just rises above the horizon and sinks again. This idea of the horizon and the sinking and the rising and the sinking. Obviously this ongoing, this amazing ongoing process of nature itself. Okay? Within me, the last of these, within me, zones. Notice we got six, a list of six. Zones, seas, cataracts is a fun word, right? Forests, volcanoes, groups. We're not exactly sure here necessarily what he means by the word groups, although we're going to get a whole lot of this as we get into this poem. He'll begin to group different kinds of things together, as we'll start even in passage 3 here in a bit. And then he'll list for us 3 different places in the world, on the globe, that would be completely unknown to most American readers of this poem. Malaysia, Polynesia, the great Western Indian islands. Now, why it is that he's chosen these, that's always fascinating. We're going to come back to this Malaysia-Polynesia reference in Broadway Pageant Part 2. But other than that, we're not going to hear from it again in Leaves of Grass. Of course, Malaysia and Polynesia and the West Indian islands will all be about the unknown, the distant, the Spice Islands, the Thousand Islands, and all of that, which was starting to be talked about, right, in American parlance during the time of Walt Whitman. Obviously, it was very exotic, very unknown. We immediately think at 3A of Conrad and the way that he also will play a very similar kind of game of telling us about what's going on the other side of the globe. Well, just to finish now at 2A. Well, think about this. This is really, in many ways, a new way for Whitman to challenge us to think about the globe and obviously his readers. And of course, as we've said before, we're all connected. We're all a part of this within. Notice the repetition of the word within. And to be the repetition of that word within, notice all the repetitions in particularly this poem and that musical lilt that will become a part of this. At 3A, think about it. Darwin's Origin of Species is published in 1859, and so you can kind of think about the significance, excuse me, the significance of all of the new sciences that are happening. How about Tennyson's Ulysses? We will quote it so many times when we study Leaves of Grass. I'm part of all that I have met. That idea that we're all somehow connected, the withinness of existence. Finally, at 3B, to make this our own. Do you remember, we've asked you this question already, but do you remember the first time you ever actually looked at a globe? You spun it, you put your finger on it. For many of us, it'll take us back to our infancy, and we were just kind of blown away by it as well. I hope that you're a lover of maps and cartography, and if you're not, certainly this poem will motivate you to do that. How about this as a 3B question to make this your own? What part of the world, or parts of the world, are for you most within you? That is to say, what parts of the world most are you impressioned by? Well, we're now going to move in passage 3 and then later in passage 4 to these questions about what we can hear and then later what we can see. I hope that you will enjoy our study now as we're ready to really jump into Salut. Thank you.